Hello and welcome to Rebuild. My name is Michael Belch, and this week I'm going to be exploring the claim that we as Christians should love our home and our nation. We should love our home and our nation. A few weeks ago, I was on Twitter and I noticed that Stephen Wolfe had put a small tweet. Some of his are longer, but he had written just a small tweet that said, I'm working on my new project. It's a book entitled Our Home. And Stephen has spoken quite a bit in the past about the need for us to have a sense of home. It's appropriate to have a sense of place that we connect with that is unique and even sacred to the people who live there. And I hope that this is true. I hope he wasn't trolling. He's a master troll, and I respect him quite a bit for it. But I hope he actually is working on this book. But partly through his tweet and some of the things he's said and some of the other things that I've been reading recently, I've really been thinking a lot about what does it mean to have a sense of home. And we have a tension as Christians in the modern evangelical age to reject any sense of home or permanence or living and dwelling here on the earth, or in a particular nation, or a particular neighborhood, or a house. We're told that it's all temporary. We shouldn't get too attached to things, that we are looking for a home in heaven. There's some truth there, but we have gone way too far. And to illustrate what I mean, I want to start with some C.S. Lewis. I've been reading The Abolition of Man recently, and he has some very, very interesting things to say about our connection to things, the proper connection that we ought to have, and understanding that we ought to have of our relation to things in the world. And he talks about the Ordo Amaris from Augustine, which is the proper arrangement of loves. And he makes the claim that only the man who has the proper love for something can use it well, can write about it well, can understand it well, and can then be the person to carry out the tasks that that thing is supposed to be used for. And to do this, he talks about horses. And he is writing about a grammar book that he had read where the writer of the book had picked a kind of an analogy, not really an analogy, but a bit of figurative language about horses. And he really criticized, the writer of this grammar book criticized what this former author had written about horses. And the reason that this grammarian criticized the piece that he was dissecting about horses was that the writer of the piece about horses had the audacity to say that the horses were happy to be companions with the early Australians. And this grammarian says, oh, that's so ridiculous. Horses don't care one way or another. If they're companions, they just are beasts of burden. Okay? And so Lewis is going to take this idea to task. And he is going to point out that only a proper love for horses can give us a sense of what a horse is for. All right, so I'm going to pick it up. This is in the first of the essays in The Abolition of Men, Men Without Chests. Okay, and it's a bit of a lengthy quote. Okay, so I set up that background so that you'll understanding it. He says this, describing that original grammarian who criticized the language about the horses. He says, I find that the same operation under the same general anesthetic is being carried out. Orbilius chooses for debunking a silly bit of writing on horses, where these animals are praised as the, quote, willing servants, unquote, of the early colonists in Australia. But he, this grammarian, he falls into the same trap as Gaius and Titius. And so these are writers who made the same error. They criticized the sentiment behind the words without actually saying anything about the grammar of them. And then Lewis says this, of Ruksh and Sleipner and the weeping horses of Achilles and the war horse in the book of Job, nay, even of Brer Rabbit and of Peter Rabbit, of men's prehistoric piety to our brother the ox, of all that this semi-anthropomorphic treatment of beasts has meant in human history and of the literature where it finds a noble and piquant expression, he has not a word to say. So Lewis is saying this writer picks that one example about the Australian horses and dismisses the whole idea of a companionship and almost a reverence towards animals that has been present in centuries and millennia of important classical literature. He goes on. Even the problems of animal psychology as they exist for science, he says nothing. He contents himself with explaining that horses are not secundum literam, which means in a literal sense, interested in colonial expansion. This piece of information is really all that his pupils get from him. Why the composition before them is bad, when others that lie open to the same charge are good, they do not hear. So Lewis is saying he never addresses the fact that in other places, very good writers have described horses as being participants and in companionship and in partnership with humans. He doesn't point out why those other cases of that are bad. Lewis goes on, much less do they, the students, learn of the two classes of men who are respectively above and below the danger of such writing. The man who really knows horses and really loves them, not with anthropomorphic illusions, but with ordinate love, that means proper love, and the irredeemable urban blockhead to whom a horse is merely an old-fashioned means of transport. And so what Lewis is saying here is that the grammarian has lost entirely the idea that if someone has a proper love for something, the man who loves and is familiar with horses, who puts his burdens on that horse's back every day, to whom the horse has become a great aid and a great means of getting from one place to the other quickly, of carrying burdens, of warmth, of companionship, that man can properly write about horses and their relationship to humanity. And the man who has no love for horses cannot conceive of how there would be this heightened partnership between the horse and the man. Here's the point. Lewis, in his essay, is writing that we have become men without chests. The chest is the part that, for Lewis, connects the intellect, the brain, with the emotion, the stomach. The chest is the part that understands the right place of something and how to act accordingly. Lewis is saying that the man who loves horses has a chest that describes the intellectual knowledge about what a horse is. Yes, technically a horse is a beast of burden, with the emotion. And the chest is what is able to properly perceive and use the horse. Now, here's what I want to connect this to for our topic. Only those who properly love a nation or a home or a place will be able to understand the role that God has given to nations and to place, and to properly guide, use, explain, and benefit from the idea of what a nation is. We have utterly come to, in some cases, hate, or in other cases, to simply have apathy towards our nation, our earthly home, the people that God has put us into. People are either Christians or non-Christians. And that's it for evangelical Christians. But no, brothers and sisters, friends, God has given nations a real important status in history. He has placed us all within a nation. And if we do not have a proper love for a nation, or for a home, or for a place, we really have no business criticizing those who do seek to bring nationhood into its proper place, bring people into their proper function within a nationhood. It's easy to be the person on the outside who is just criticizing and criticizing and criticizing. Only those who love nations in the proper order, of course, God's proper order, can understand and commend nations to other people. And so, frankly, I'm tired of Christians who dismiss the idea of nations altogether, and then, for the Christians who love their nation, say, well, that's idolatry. That's wrong. That's sinful. You have no idea because you have placed nations at the bottom of the bucket. You have no love for them. You have no care for them. You have no experience with them. You don't understand what they're for. And then when Christians say we want to redeem our nation, we want our nation to honor God, you say, that's impossible. That's dumb. That's unbiblical. That's sinful. That's idolatrous. That's temporal. No, you do not have the proper love for nations. Now, some of you might be saying that's awfully harsh, or you might be saying, no, you're wrong. Nations are not important. We have a spiritual citizenship. I don't have time to unpack the whole article right now, but I highly, highly recommend an article called Brothers, We Are Not Exiles by Jordan Wilson. And in this article, he traces the idea of being an exile in the Bible, particularly in the book of Hebrews. And he points out that in Hebrews, exile was a term that was applied to Abraham before Christ came. Abraham looked forward to a place, a heavenly city. But he points out that the author of Hebrews says in chapter 12 that we have come to Mount Zion and to the city of the living God, and that because of the death and resurrection of Christ, and because of what the gospel is doing in the world, it's expanding the kingdom of God, it's converting people from sinners into worshipers, and it's transforming us into a living temple, a holy city of God. Because that has happened, Hebrews stops referring to us as exiles. We have received Mount Zion, the holy kingdom, according to Hebrews 12. And of course, there's a sense where the final revelation of the holy temple, the godly city, which is the people of God that will descend from heaven to the remade heavens and earth in Revelation chapter 20, we still await that to some degree, but the city is being built now. Friends, we will inherit the earth, not just at some future time, but even now. We extend Christ's rule over all things. And what I want to tell you is that we extend Christ's rule over even the physical earth. There's a reason why in multiple places in the New Testament, in Luke, in the Great Commission in Luke, it says that we are to preach the gospel to all creatures. Not that animals can get saved, but that the effects of the gospel will change how humanity interacts with the earth. Because we have two great purposes. Knowing God is one of them. But the second great purpose for humanity is as important to God. In fact, in Genesis 1, it's the first reason why God created us. It was to become stewards of the earth and to take dominion of it. That is why Jesus commanded the disciples in Matthew 18 to teach the nations to obey all of Christ's commands. Friends, the earth, in Romans 8, the earth languishes under the curse. In Romans 8, I think it's, let me look at here. Romans 8, 20 through 23. It says this: "So the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it." This means that when God cursed the ground, the earth, which previously would have willingly accommodated Adam and Eve and their descendants' efforts to bring fruitfulness out of it and to produce wonderful and marvelous things, it now produced thorns, and it worked against the creative efforts of mankind. And so it was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to corruption and obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now. Till now, when Paul wrote it. There's a sense where the earth languished under futility and under sin until now, until the gospel came and begins to undo that work. We would be foolish and overly modernistic to think that the earth has no sense of right and wrong, no sense of what is going on by the people who inhabit it. Consider in Leviticus 18, God says this. He warns the Israelites. He says, "For the men who were in the land before you committed all these abominations, and the land has become defiled." The earth, the place where they lived, those pagans, was defiled. And then it says this: "If you defile the land, it will vomit you out as it spewed out the nations before you." The earth longs to be used righteously and by righteous people. And when extremely wicked people inhabit a land, it participates willingly in spewing them out. It wants to participate with humanity in the stewardship that God has given to humanity. And it moans and begrudges the fact that God has forced it to work against that under the curse. But if a population, if a people become so wicked, the earth definitely participates again in ejecting, in spewing, in vomiting out those people, those wicked people who have defiled the land. The gospel teaches nations to obey all of Christ's commands. And that means that peoples and nations will begin to steward the earth in a way that honors God. And the land will go, the thorn is not out all the way, but it's partially out. It will sigh. It will say, "This is better." Go back to to Romans 8 again. Verse 23, it says, not only the creation, but we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for our adoption as sons, the redemption of our bodies. Our redemption is partial, and the earth will sense it as a people use the land and steward it properly. Think of the rocks. Think of what Jesus says in Luke 19:40. He answered, "I tell you, if these were silent, these people, the very stones would cry out." The earth, the stones, the trees, the mountains, the rivers, the streams, they long to see God honored and glorified. They long to participate with us in that process. And the gospel frees us. It redeems us so that we extend the kingdom of God throughout all of humanity. And then, partially, not completely, but in a real sense, we begin to steward the earth properly. We begin to take the animals. Think about this as a pet owner. You are a loving, gracious steward of your dog or your cat. If you're a farmer, you are a steward of the earth. If you own a house, you are a steward. You are called to tend it, to invest in it. And when you love these things properly, you understand the partnership that we have with them, the mutual relationship, the way that we drag time and animals, beasts of burden, technology, laws, ethics, morality, economics. We drag all of these things so that they obey the commands of Christ. When we do that, we move ourselves and the earth underneath us closer to the redemption that we're waiting for. It's not going to happen perfectly until Christ comes. Friends, properly love your nation. Properly love your home. I cannot listen to our national anthem here in the US without getting teary-eyed. It's not that I don't love Jesus. It's just that I think of the sacrifice that men made before me. I think of God's grace. I think of the common bond that we share together. Belief in the law that God has given to us, the order that God has built in creation, and the project that was launched to try and arrange society in a way that would honor God. And I get teary-eyed. It's emotional to me. And this is good. This is not idolatry. Love your nation properly, and then grieve that your nation is not following God the way that it ought. Who is going to teach the nations? We are. How are we going to teach them anything at all if we don't love them? And I'm not saying just the people, but if you don't love your nation, you won't care if your nation doesn't obey God. At least not as much. You must love your nation. God has put you in it. In the same way that He's given you your family. You don't discard them. You don't cast them aside as soon as you become a Christian. Rather, you become a Christian member of your family. You become a Christian father, a Christian mother. We are to be Christian Americans, Christian Canadians, Christian Spaniards. You are to love your nation properly and then teach it to obey all that Christ has commanded. Okay, that's it. I hope that helps for this week. Catch you next time.